for today's quiz, we have this gearbox. It's a special kind of gearbox that we're going to end up trying to figure out. I'm going to hold up a diagram and try and explain what's going on. On this diagram, you'll notice that I have number 7. That's connected to a motor. It's going to spin this small pinion gear. This large ring gear, which we call number 2, is then going to rotate. Number 5 is the carrier, and that carrier also rotates right along with that big, massive gear. Inside, we've got 4 smaller gears, number 2s and number 4s, and they go out to these half shafts, number 1 and number 1. Our question is, if 7 is always spinning from a motor or an engine or something like that, and then I hold on to this side, number 1, what happens to the other side of number 1? Hold the quiz up. Hopefully we can see this. As always, mark your answer to the best of your ability and then list your confidence. The answer that we most readily get is that these 2 half shafts are always going to be spinning together. So if I have that big ring gear going, they're going to end up trying to go together. So if I stop one side, the other side has to stop. And that's the answer that we typically get. All right, to show what's happening here, I've affixed some tape to each one of these axles, and they're a little bit rusty and a little bit dirty. Now, when I turn this is that pinion shaft. In the diagram, I had it to the side here. But when I spin this, you can see this side, and only this side, is turning right now. Let me take it back to where it was. Now, if I hold on to this side so it can't move, now you'll see that other side starts to move. That's the whole point of this mechanism. This is a differential. And what a differential allows you to do is go around turns. Look, if both wheels were always going the same speed, you're going to end up going in the same direction, which is a straight line. In order to turn, the wheel on the outside has to spin faster than the inside. If I didn't have this differential, I would end up having both wheels spinning at the same time. You'd turn your front wheels, and the car would have to jump because the rubber's going to bind up, and it would have to jump so that the tires could be going the same distance. If not, something's got to give. Either the road surface on the tire is going to end up just ripping your tires to shreds, or there is a time when you might want something where you didn't have a differential. And those are the off-road vehicles, where you don't mind if the inner wheel starts ripping up the grass or the dirt or something like that. So the answer to our quiz is, if I hold one of the half shafts, the other one has to spin. Now, that's our quiz, but as always, students are going to say, yeah, but can we see how this works inside? And that's what we're going to do now. We're going to go in a little bit more depth here. All right, we're going to take this apart and show what's inside. First thing, I'm going to be using power tools. Anytime you're in a shop, you really should not be wearing a tie. I'm going to simply tuck that in to my shirt so it's not hanging out. Still should never wear a tie in here. The only power tool I'm using is going to be this drill, and I'll set the clutch to a very weak setting where I could stop it if I needed to, okay? Now I'm just going to take all the bolts off. You don't have to worry about stripping bolts when you're taking them off. So, in the interest of time, I'll use a drill. And I've taken this apart before. Be careful if it's your first time that you don't break off these nuts or bolts. All right, let's see if that'll do it. Now pull this whole thing off. Now this pinion shaft is going to fall off as soon as I pull these off. There's one of these holding right there. Get this one the rest of the way. I'm trying to leave them in so that I can put this right back together. Oh, this one right here. There's a bunch of these. All right. And there were two that I want to keep track of. That way. Now look, might as well talk about this. A lot of students have never taken anything apart, and I encourage you to take things apart. But it's really important that you put them back together. A lot of people will say, well, are you trying to make engineers or mechanics? Mechanical engineers or mechanics? And I say both. I think a really good mechanical engineer understands what mechanics do, and I think mechanics absolutely benefit from understanding a little bit of the engineering. So one of the reasons that I'm going to leave all of these bolts in here, on this one, it's a really simple process. They're all exactly the same length. Often they're not. So when you leave the bolts exactly where they need to be, you can put this back together, because we're going to take this apart. Here's our pinion shaft. It would simply rotate right here. Now, I'm going to tell you right now where this is from. This is from a tractor. This is a standard tractor transmission. What I want you to think about is this pinion would have been here, and there would have been a pulley. This is where you would have sat. So you'd sit above here, and there'd be a pulley here. Up front, let me turn around. Up front would be where you're driving the tractor. And in front of you, you'd have an engine spinning. Down at the bottom, you'd have a pulley. And that pulley is connected with a belt to this pulley. And so the engine is always spinning. When you use your lever, you can either take the tension out of the belt, or you could put it in, however you want. But once you do that, this starts to rotate. This pinion starts to rotate. Once that pinion, and I'm just going to put it back into the shaft so I don't lose it, put it right there. Once this rotates, I now have, this is the transmission part, and this is the differential. Let's just show you. I know what gear I'm in. This is a 6-speed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I wanted to be in 6th gear because if you don't know, tractors are geared very, very low. If I put this in 1st gear, you'd barely see this tape move earlier when I was doing that demonstration. So in this case, you can see both pieces of tape are moving, and they would have to unless I had this differential. Now, when I grab onto this shaft right here, I'll stop this one. You'll see that other side moves, and when I let this one go, the other side moves. Now, if I just slow this one down a little bit, it'll mainly turn that one, and this one will turn slower. And that is the mechanism of the differential. And by the way, the differential is right here. I'll probably have to bring the camera a little bit closer. Now, when I was a kid, this was my white whale. I could not figure out how differentials did this. I saw them and I had pictures, but in my mind, it was like above what my brain could handle. I didn't understand how it knew which side to go to. And it's the beauty of using these 4 gears together. If you believe in intelligence testing or cognitive abilities, I would say at the age of 12 or 13, and whenever I was obsessed with these, it was literally the limit. I could not figure out how this would work, especially in my head. And remember, we didn't have videos that would help us or anything like that. So I'm going to pull this out, and I want to show you how to pull things out and put them back together. Because it turns out, after working with students for some time, many students have never taken anything apart. And I encourage you to do so, especially if you're not going to use it again. But regardless, you want to develop a set of habits so that you can put these together. Lots and lots of people take things apart and can never put them back together. So I'm going to show you how to do this and always be able to put it back together. I'm going to probably zoom in a little bit here. Hopefully this is close enough for you to see now. Here's what's happening. We have our pinion gear that fits right into this other ring gear. As the transmission, that's what this is. This is the transmission part. The transmission will spin. The power came down from the engine through whatever gears they're going to use. This is 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th. I'm in 6th gear right now. It'll come over to this shaft over here, all the way through to another gear reducer. Remember, this is going to be spinning very slowly where the wheels are connected. But the engine itself was spinning very fast. So you'll probably have a small pulley to a bigger pulley here. You get a gear reduction, and then you get another gear reduction from this number of teeth going to that big ring gear. And then you might get more of a gear reduction depending on what gear you choose. And then 6 gear is actually not reducing. But regardless, we come out here, and then we have a small gear going to a big gear. And we're going to get another gear reduction. And then we have a small gear to a big gear again. We get another gear reduction. And we finally get another gear reduction inside the differential. That's why tractor axle spins so slowly. Lots of reduction. Now, I also want to point out something else from an engineering perspective is you'll notice that the size of the shaft, the size of the gear teeth, all of that are going to increase as I get closer and closer to the wheels because I'm demanding more torque off of each one of those. So the gears here can be rather small, but notice the size of that monstrous gear. And, you know, somewhere in the middle and get smaller and smaller. So as an engineer, you should know about that. All right, so let's show you again how this mechanism is working. Maybe I can rotate this slightly to the side so you can see how these inner teeth are working here. So notice, there's no way for me to stop this monstrous gear right here. So we know that this has to be rotating around, which means these shafts are going to end up feeling some of that rotation. But it's these inner gears, the 4 of these, let me get them in a different position. Notice, they will go together as if they are a solid piece, unless I hold on to one of them. And now these 2 side gears versus the shaft gears can end up differentiating their speed. You see how they're able to walk right along there in a circular motion. If I go to the other side, it'll be basically the same thing. I'll just put this under here like that. And you can see if I end up stopping them from rotating. All right, so that's how the mechanism works. Now, you might be wondering why I have on wood, and that is simply to stabilize it. There's no other reason for this. All right, I'm going to move this out of the way, and we're going to take all of this apart and put it back together, and I'll show you how to do that. I move the camera back a little bit so we can show you what we're going to end up doing. Look, this case here is not needed at this point. There's no way for me to put this on backwards. I just have to make sure that the pinion is put inside there. So what I can do is I can take this and move this out of the area. And I'll just put it directly over there. There's really no way I can put that on backwards. Now what I can do is I can end up starting to take off this piece right here. Now, the differential itself, I need to point a few things out. First of all, understand that this entire mechanism would be bathed in either oil or it'd have grease in it. So all of that is cleaned out, so we don't have to worry about that. I'm going to take these pieces of tape. I don't need those, they're just a distraction. Right here are little oil seals. So if I had oil or grease coming through here, it would stop at those rubber pieces. I'm just going to take the differential apart, put that back together, make sure that I can do that. So this pops out all as one piece. Now it's important to see how you're going to put these together. So first of all, I notice there's little washers here. Those are thrust washers, and they have to fit in. They only fit in one way. And I have my rubber seal here, and I've got that washer that's going to prevent this side gear from wearing down the aluminum here. So I'll put that down here like that. Now inside here, this pops out with my other 2 side gears, and they come apart something like this. And the faces were pointing towards one another. Before you take anything else apart, to see if you can get that part back together, notice I took them out and laid them exactly how they were. So first thing I'm going to look at is there's no bias to this. It can go on either way. So I'm going to simply put my gears back together like this, and they slip right into this side piece right here. I'm reaching quite a bit just so I can get the camera angle. Now, a lot of people will think this is the easy part. No, this is the hard part. And so make sure that you're giving yourself plenty of time. I'll show you the trick. I want to try and get these two axles to line up perfectly. If I get this quickly, understand that I've done this many times because this does not like to go in. And you'll see that I have a gap underneath here and here. So it did not go in. So we have to do this again. Now I'll hold this up and I'll show you what I mean. The axles have to be perfectly parallel to one another. I have to move them until they're parallel and then it'll just drop in. It's not dropping in. Not even close. So I'm going to have to work on this a little bit. And this is why I'm saying do not take anything else apart until you master this. Okay? Now one of the other things that I can do to help me, because it's still, I need to make sure that this is in the right spot. You can take this piece out, and just so you know, when I take this one out, I'm going to look and see if there is anything. There's a small washer, and then there's a big washer, and then there's another small washer on this one. Now, unfortunately, I just pulled those two out. There's two washers that just fell in here. These are thrust washers. These are going to make up any gap that I had. So they would go on this side. So I can put this back together. But this is the process that you want to end up following. You want to end up putting things back together until you're absolutely comfortable going on to the next step. This one only goes in one way. Okay, so I'm going to go back to this. Just another whirl. Make sure they're looking parallel. And voila, it worked, okay? But look, I've done this many times and I've worked on many gear systems, so this is really difficult. But don't go any further until you master this. So it's going to get more complicated. All right, I think at this point I'll probably zoom into this area and we'll do the rest of this. You don't need to see my face for this. I'm zoomed out. Let's do this. I'll take my differential out, and I'll put it down and set it so that I can put it right back together. I want to leave as many hints as I can for when I put this back together. I'll pull out this other reduction gear. Now, one of the things that I want to point out, you're either going to be a setter or a flopper. I flop. I let them flop straight down. Just let them flop straight down. I'll work on the other side, and this can flop. And remember, setting, flopping, however you want to do it. I think I can put all of this over here to keep it out of the way. So we're going to need to go through the rest of this transmission. I set this one down. Notice there's nothing about that washer that means it can only go on one way or the other. I'll put all of those together and I'll try to line those up. Okay, next step is, now this one's going to be difficult. I've got to take off all the gears. One of the things that you want to make a mental note of, the teeth are facing to my right and I have a bevel going to the left. Very important. These are brass bearings and they are going to allow the steel shaft to stay away from the aluminum, which might wear it down. The brass is going to have a little lubrication in it and will hopefully reduce that wear. I can pull this top one off. The brass comes off first, sets off right here. I have a washer. Now I can start pulling off my gears. Remember, I'm a flopper, so I'm going to flop these down right here. Each one of these is, you'll see that the gears don't really matter, but I'll flop them down in order. Each gear comes off, and I lay them down, just like if they flopped off. Now I'm at this point, I can go on the other side. I've got my brass, I've got my spacer, and then I've got my chain. But notice I can't get anything else off until I start working on the other piece. So pull this one out. This is going to be my next level down. So I've got my brass, I've got my thrust washer, and now you'll notice that the gears are going to be biased one way or the other. And you can see on this side that it's different from that side, so I have to flop them down. Now, these little ears right here are where all of the, maybe I can stop for a second and point this out. All of the gears are free to spin on the steel shaft. The only time the gear engages with that shaft is when I use this gear shifter. And normally I'd have the gear shifter, it would move the collar. Now I can see that as I pop it right into here, I'm in, this one was third gear. That third gear is now part of that shaft because of these little forks. I'm going to take the rest of these off. Flop, flop. Oh, that one popped off. I need to put that down here. I would not recommend wearing a coat when you're doing this. Flop this off. You'll notice that there is going to be a groove cut in here, which means there is going to be a key. And this key right here is going to be crucial. That is a safety mechanism, believe it or not. If too much torque gets put on this, we want the key to break. This key is $1. The rest of the transmission might be, I don't know, 1,000 or whatever it might be. We want to sacrifice $1 to save the 1,000. I'm going to pull this out the rest of the way. Flop. Flop. I'm going to take a break. I need to assess what I've done. If I put this together incorrectly, it'll never go back. I might even take a picture of this. I might draw a diagram. Whatever you do, you need to make sure that you put this exactly the way that it came off. Notice that I had my last gear, the gear was sitting there, and then I had a little thrust washer. So I need to remember that thrust washer goes against the ring gear. The ring gear is curving out in this direction, so the pinion would sit here. It's also a good idea to speak to yourself out loud. So I'm going to pull this off. I've got my thrust washer that goes on. And notice I've got a flop. This would be the easiest thing to put on incorrectly. Then I've got my chain. It comes off. And that shaft is going to, let's see, I'll flop this one straight down here and put this shaft right on here. All right. Now I've got my forks, I've got a spacer, and then I've got my chain and gear. So take this off. I think my chain can come off. And I'll flop that to this side. I have my spacer that would go right here. And I have my main gear that flops off here. And now I have my shifting forks that will come off to this side. And you'll notice they have ears that go into the inner groove of this fork mechanism. So they end up going into one another. All right. Now to reassembling. Let me take a break. Okay, I just took a 5-minute break, which can be dangerous. You want to make sure that your mind does not go on to something else. Thankfully, I have everything laid out, hopefully exactly as it was. I need to put both of my forks. Now, before I do anything else, I want to point out that all of our power, is going to go through this little piece right here. But remember, that's still a big chunk of steel. It has tremendous strength. But I once took apart lawnmowers, a lawnmower when I was a young lad, and I had a grass cutting business. And this is the piece that I had to replace. My little tabs, these pieces of metal, simply wore out. They were $3 for the entire transmission to be repaired. The labor was going to be, I don't know, a couple $100. Thankfully, I was able to do that on my own. All right. I know that these have to go in. Try it this way. If you do this for a living, you would get very, very, very quick. Got my fork pieces in here. I need to get them started. All right. I'm going to put, let's see here. This back together. Then I have my spacer. And I have my gear. Now I need to remember, I need to get this other shaft on here at the same time. So I think I took my gear off with the chain. Small gear over here. Now I set it down like this. I should. Now this is where I just might have screwed up. I can't remember if I had it this way or that way. Very important to be either a flopper or a setter. I think this had to go through. And my ring gear was on, then my washer, then I could start putting my other gears on, if I'm not mistaken. Because these gears are getting smaller, I should be able to put all of them on and then slide the successively larger gears on the top on here. That on. First gear, second gear, third gear, fourth gear, fifth gear. Move them around ever so slightly to get them on. And I might as well put my washer on it. That doesn't matter what direction. My thrust washer here. I think that is working out. I had my spacer. I have my key that I need to put in. Slip my gear on. I'm in neutral right now. I can spin that shaft, put this gear on, and then on with my brass washer. See if it all fits together. Very close. on each one of the brass fittings, small triangular edge that will fit into a cutout on the aluminum. If I do not put those down in their cutouts, when I put that entire case on, it will not collapse back on. And then if you try and tighten them, you'll crack the case and you've ruined everything. All right, I'll put this how it should be. This one needs rotated. This needs rotated in the opposite direction. And I put this one on backwards. So easy, and I've done this many, many times. And yet, I've already made 2 or 3 errors. So if you're going to do this for your first time, give yourself an hour or 2 and take your time and do it step by step. I'm trying to do this quick enough so that we can have it on video. I'm going to put my last reducer counter shaft together like this. They flopped on. Turns out they don't really matter. And as an engineer and a mechanic, what you're going to need to do is always end up making sure that you have the right amount of play for each one of the gears. And you get these extra shims. You'll notice that I'm in neutral right now. So I can spin all of my gears without this shaft moving whatsoever. And I'll put this one, that's first gear. So in this case, you can see, I didn't quite get it. There we go. Now I've got my first gear, and now it's rotating. Or wait, let's just double check. That's neutral. That should be first. And then sixth is all the way down there, and you can see how much faster this is rotating. All of that is going through those 2 little forks. All right. Now, the question I have is, can anyone figure out what this chain does? I'll leave it in first gear for, well, let's see what gear I'm in. Neutral. That's probably about first gear. All right, now to put the differential back together. Again, for your first time, I might take a few hours. Give yourself plenty of time. Let's see if I can put this together. Oh, it looks perfect until you realize there's a massive gap here. And just to show you that this is incorrect, this would never fit on. It's now jammed up, can't fit on. Take this back out. Do it again. Hopefully I won't embarrass myself too badly. Although I might. Gotta get them just perfectly parallel. Oh, I shouldn't put this together yet because I need to answer the question. The question was, what is the chain for? Can anyone figure out what the chain is doing? Look, I've got my gears, and there's first gear, so when I'm turning this, it's going to always turn the other shaft the opposite direction. So if I'm rotating, we'll say this one is counterclockwise, this shaft goes clockwise. Anytime you have 2 gears meshing, you'll have that feature. That's what the chain's for. See, when I take it all the way over, let's see what gear I'm in. I'm probably in first or second. Remember, there's no oil on any of this, so it's hard to move. Right there, I'm, in this case, notice that this shaft and this shaft are going in the same direction. That's reverse. Reverse needs a chain to make sure whatever this shaft is doing, this goes in the same direction. All other gears are going to go opposite of that. So that's why we have the chain, and that's just to get reverse. Let me see if I can put this back together and finish this up. I want to try and get everything just perfect. Rubber seals are in place. That looks great. And you'll notice how slowly this is going to rotate now because I'm in first gear. I can take my pinion shaft, put it right back up through the top. I've got all of my bolts. Make sure there's nothing that's going to impede putting this case back together. You want to look around to make sure everything is perfectly flat. You should use a hand tool at first to get each one of these started, just so they don't start to strip, and then you use a drill and cross thread. Once they're cross threaded, now you've just created a huge amount of work for yourself. Make sure they end up catching a few threads. And once I do that, then I can go back to my power tool and increase speed. I would recommend not using the power tools at all until you're very competent. You could do all this work, screw up one of these bolts, and now you've just made a lot more work for yourself. These all feel good. I will put my chuck on number 1, clutch, which means as soon as it gets even the slightest bit of a bind, it'll stop. I don't need this massive extension. And then I'll just, I don't have to go all the way down, but regardless, I'm going to go in a star pattern. I want to make sure that they all start to go together before I tighten any particular one. So I'm just going to go around, take up my slack, and pull it together. Slowly make sure everything looks sealed. It does. I think I've got all of them. And now I'll start to go around and do my star pattern to make sure that each one is tightened. I forgot about that one. That one. And from there I can tighten each one and torque them down to whatever specs they need. All right, we're in first gear. That was a lot of work. I hope it gives you a little bit of courage to try to do something like this. Try to do it on something that hopefully you don't need to use again, but build up your skills for when you really need a win. All right, that's your quiz for today.